Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm just thrilled to be here. Just a few points of lead-in. First of all, I have the good benefit to have inherited this program and actually a couple others from Captain Russ Schilling. He was a DARPA program manager. He is an actual psychologist. I joke at times that I'm not only am I not a psychologist, but I do not play one on TV. I'm a computer scientist, as it's been noted. I will tell you the reason I inherited the programs is because when I came to DARPA almost 4 years ago now, I ran into Captain Russ Schilling, and I was captivated, frankly, with his work. And there was a mention that I spent a number of years in the service, and I spent about 18 months deployed, and have had the great privilege to serve with many of the folks that you're going to frankly be helping. And so just from the heart, I will tell you, I will encourage you to redouble your efforts and do what you can for a segment of our population, those that have served admirably but are experiencing pain, that are experiencing suffering. And I think as I was when I first met Russ, very captivated in the work, continue to be so, and I'm very interested in what you're doing and encourage you to, as I said before, redouble your efforts. So DCAPS, I happen to have one of my colleagues here from DARPA, and when I first inherited the programs, I kind of stumbled over the acronym. And so the D is detection, but you could also think of that as digitization and computation and computational analysis of psychological signals. And the reason I stumble over the word is because what we're doing, I believe, in some respects, is taking information, digitizing it, putting it in a quantitative form that can allow you to do some analysis. So it's taking some of that as we know, there's certainly a subjective nature to some of the work that we do. This is making an effort to use new and emerging technologies in a way that can digitize and capture what, as I'll allude to in a minute here, some honest signals that actually, if you think about it, are taking place right now. So I do like to move around a lot, and frankly, if it was not a stage here, I'd be moving around amongst you. And what I'd be doing is I'd be reading some of your cues, right? I mean, you can think of some of the very best teachers or educators that you had, and they have, in some respects, almost a sixth sense, and they can see and detect in some way, normally using tacit knowledge. They're not consciously thinking about it, but they're reading cues, whether they be gestures, whether they be expressions, whether they be movements, and they're using that to determine how effectively they're communicating. Well, that's really what this program is all about. So if you'll note here, it was based largely on this notion of honest signals. So what we're trying to do with DCAPS is we're trying to detect, we're trying to capture, and then compute information that would allow us to determine the psychological, the cognitive, the emotional state of a subject. So it's not to replace these technologies in no way, shape, or form are trying to replace a human counselor, but they're trying to enhance their ability to discern the cognitive, emotional states of those people that they're interacting with. So as it's noted here on the slide, they're using verbal and nonverbal cues, even online activities, as indicators of social behavior. As we developed these capabilities, we wanted to look for ways to use them independently, but also in combination. And part of as the program is coming to a conclusion, this work began over 4 years ago. So some of this, in some respects, as I've spoke to some folks, are saying, well, you get a lot of that on just a smartphone. But this was really, in many ways, well ahead of its time in terms of trying to use signals that could be captured technically, and using it as a means to discern some of the states of subjects. So we'll talk about the novel data sources and also a variety of expertise that were from sources that DARPA has typically been able to tap into. Now, before I go into the details of the specific programs, DARPA has been around with us since about 1958. It was brought forth, was created in response to the Sputnik challenge. And frankly, President Eisenhower was appalled that we were caught so flat-footed that from a technical perspective, we were surprised. And the effort at that point was to never again for the United States to be strategically surprised. So DARPA's purpose-focused mission is about preventing and creating strategic surprise in a technical sense. So you might ask, it might beg the question, why is DARPA in this space? Well, you know, DARPA is also about ensuring our long-term national security, and certainly this issue, and is what Russ in particular, and I feel I'm very glad that I can highlight his contributions. He felt that there was something that DARPA could be doing in this space to help this population of soldiers, sailors, and Marines who had experienced some degree of emotional distress as a result of their activities. So using in true military fashion, the title of the slide is not one but two acronyms. So you've got DCAPS, and I'm not going to unpack it because I look at Kevin, because I think the first 6 months I had the program, I was saying, D is detection, that's what it was. So you know what DCAPS is, so BLUF is the bottom line up front. This is, if I was to get the hook earlier, this would be sufficient, just to know that we want to take early recognition of indicators of psychological distress. And we want to assist those counselors, those that are interacting with them at various stages in the process, in doing a better job of determining what those individuals that are in critical need of care, those are in need of some degree of care, and actually some that may not need care at all. So we want to more effectively triage those folks. That's the real focus of the program. But on the other hand, hopefully you'll be able to see, as I described some of the capabilities, it can also be used to help train these counselors. So in the context of learning how to go about having some of these interactions, you can use these tools and see, in effect, the effect that a counselor is having in conjunction with their work with a subject. We also want to share these insights, and frankly, DARPA looks to do a lot of different things. In a perfect world, some of our programs end up in what they call a program of record. So we've done the early work, we've done the preliminary research, and we get the state-of-the-art practices to such a state that somebody in the Department of Defense would be willing to specify formal requirement associated with that capability, and then that capability then would have a larger program, and there'd be more development, and it would ultimately produce a fieldable product or program that for the Department of Defense or others. But we also know that that's not always going to be the case. So DARPA is also quite proud of the fact that as a result of funded research, there's a significant contribution to the body of knowledge, that we're in fact advancing the boundaries of knowledge by virtue of, for example, some of the publications. And out of the DCAPS program, there's been any number of publications. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to go into deep depth on any of what we did in DCAPS. Hopefully I'm going to inspire some of you to maybe want to pursue additional information. And the beautiful thing is a lot of that information is captured in our program bibliography, and you can get more information from there. And if it's not available there, of course, you can always contact us at DARPA, and if you have interest in following up. There's also a little insight this is really not up front, something that we were particularly, they believed when they put the program together, that this notion of a virtual human, that it would have a significant impact. We actually learned some things about how that could be incorporated into therapeutic settings to good effect. Some of the specific applications, this has been used in limited trials with respect to military personnel, both pre, during, and post-deployment. It has been deployed to some clinical training sites, and one of a really interesting application, and it's one of the first capabilities I'm going to describe, is being used in call centers and hotlines, and there's continues to be a fair amount of interest. The Department of Veterans Affairs, the Veterans Affairs Center for Innovation, we have a memorandum of understanding, so they are continue to look for potential follow-on studies that will build upon the work that we've done to this point. We've also, based on my background in long-term service at the United States Military Academy, they have incorporated some of these capabilities into their lab environments for their Department of Behavioral Science and Leadership, and are using it to facilitate, and it's a different context, to facilitate helping in that setting cadets develop the ability to engage in effective counseling, whether it be in that setting would be performance counseling. Okay, so I mentioned that we focus on these honor signals. So very much motivated by the work of Dr. Pentland at MIT. And so what are some of the data that we're looking at? Both spoken and written communications, and particularly highlighting here this metadata. So as we're engaging in a form of communication now, the specific words that I use convey a lot of the meaning. But we also know that there's a tremendous amount of information that's conveyed in what is listed here as metadata. But just, for example, things like my rate of speech, my intonation, my dynamic range, those metadata, that metadata about the words that I'm speaking, frankly, gives you a much better sense of where I am in a cognitive and emotional state. I will highlight that some of you may have noted that as we kicked off the day that because of a misunderstanding on my part, I was up on the stage. Did anybody note that I was up there? And feeling quite awkward when I realized that I was not supposed to be on the stage, but also trying to maintain a poker face so as to not appear to be in a state of panic, which on the inside I was like, damn, I am on the stage in front of hundreds of people and I don't belong here. And I thank you for that, Kevin, for encouraging me to. So either way, there was a point here. But in that case, what was going on, at least on my face and gesture, was supposed to mask the internal. Either way, you understand. Okay. But so there's both the words that I might use. There's as I highlighted, there's facial expression. There's eye gaze. There is focus, point of focus. There's, as I mentioned, expressions and micro expressions, gestures, and so on. All of these nonverbal cues could be used as a means to discern my or anyone's individual cognitive emotional state. Now, so. Also, I want to highlight, I'm not going to specifically speak to, there was some mention of there, and I'm sure there's great interest in neurological responses. So we do have a program, but in the interest of time, I selected 3 of there's about 5, almost 6 different capabilities I could have described, but note that it is there and is important work, and clearly, if you stayed up with the current state-of-the-art practice and being able to discern neurological activities, at least with EEGs, we have one performer, and I'll highlight it now because I'm not going to talk about it later. They've got a baseball cap form factor. It's 4 leads, so it's not 16 or 24 leads, but they were able to get some really interesting results with just those 4 leads, baseball cap form factor, wireless, so it's not when we think of EEGs, we think of a lot of goop and having the requirement of having a shaved head like mine, and that's in fact not the case. The different products I'm going to talk about is what we're calling reality analysis, and that's actually 2 capabilities I'm going to describe, Manat and then Sin Sensei, and rather than talk about them at this point, I'll just plow in and describe them. So reality analysis, this is work was primarily done by a firm called Cogito, and their mobile application and what they're calling a clinician application. Although done by the same company, in some respects, they're very much they're not directly related. The reality analysis module was frankly something. Again, recall when this was first proposed. This is 4 years ago. This is not in the here and now, where this may not seem that groundbreaking. But frankly, I think it may have influenced to where we are currently. It is an app, for lack of a better word, that somebody that may be experiencing some emotional distress could maintain on their smartphone. Presumably, their smartphone would stay with them throughout throughout their waking and actually even sleeping hours. And it would collect information through the course of the day. And here's just some of the data that it can collect, but in addition to others. And it simply provides some feedback in one context just to the individual on these 4 dimensions, whether they are engaging in sufficient travel, whether they're being sufficiently social, the quality of their sleep, and this less objective measure called mood. And it gives them some feedback that could be used for their own purposes. And some of the thinking that went into this is when somebody begins to experience emotional distress, at times they could spiral downward and not, in effect, not catch themselves before they get into a state such that they are experiencing a significant distress, but they got there because they were not aware. This capability will, in the hope, and we've seen some results that this is in fact being borne out in practice, help catch them, help alert them if their level of activity has been decreased such that it might reflect that they have got into a different space, that the quality of their sleep, which we know how tremendously important that is in terms of wellness, is diminished, that their level of social interaction, which much of that information is discernible using something like their smartphone, that the trends, and it's all about the trends, it's comparing data against a baseline that's developed with this particular individual. So you can see how then there's also means through which they can do some audio journaling. And I just want to highlight here, call and text contact with Manat. I'm going to describe Manat next. That's a capability that does some analytics on your communication. So it does some natural language understanding, and then it can do some analysis against the actual words and the meaning you're trying to convey. So this particular capability was this work is published, and I've got some results I'm going to show. But you can imagine, just for the individual, that would be of some value. If these individuals elect, they opt in, this information can be shared with a medical healthcare professional. And then you can hopefully see how valuable this might be for somebody that is monitoring a large group of individuals to see if one of their patients has some deviation in on what this app is telling them. So it's, in other words, alerting, if you would, if the individual opts in. And we saw some very interesting results about the demographic that happens to be the target for this application, which I'll describe here in a minute. Okay, so I will acknowledge up front, none of the work, frankly because of the nature of DARPA, is strict, rigorous clinical trials. Okay, so we performed some degree of assessment with the intent that it would be interesting enough that others would want to pick up this work and do more formal, rigorous clinical trials. But in this particular case, we did have 95 individuals over a 3-month period. Most of them did these weekly audio diaries, and that in itself, one of the nice outcomes was that just the taking the opportunity to do an audio journal, that in itself was determined to be, in some respects, therapeutic. We supplemented that with some weekly survey data. 50 million data points were used as a means to do some analytics, and people use the capability. We often see treatments of some kind where there's not a great deal we don't have that degree of protocol adherence, and so we were very pleased to see that. Then we did a non-clinical trial, 21 participants, and the thing that we saw, and I'll show some data in a minute, is there was much greater degree of interest in or comfort with sharing their mental health status with healthcare professionals. And the predictive models here, and I think I've got a slide here that shows this, show that for a variety of symptoms, it actually performs quite well. So here are some of the symptoms that Reality Analysis Mobile was trying to discern. So if you look across the top here, and we're not going to, this is somewhat of a, something that you would certainly want to take a look at later on. But in terms of trying to discern whether or not they've got physical isolation, social isolation, fatigue, ability to concentrate, disturbance, whether or not they sound depressed, using a variety of means, you can see that our accuracy, the area under the curve, which of course we need to be above 0.5, across a number of measures looks actually very good. So the point of showing this was not for you to have to read all the words, but to show that, at least in some respects, we've got some fairly decent results for the small populations that we've used this with. Now here's the interesting, there's two slides here on that address the privacy issues. So what these two charts will show you is that it appears that our veteran population is more comfortable sharing data, because you can see the real value of this, or it becomes when they are comfortable, they are voluntarily sharing, and also the really striking privacy ratings with respect to there's apparently an age issue here in play, that our younger population, which is the majority of our target, that's the population we're targeting most directly, is more comfortable. So the combined effects of both veterans being more comfortable sharing and younger folks being more comfortable sharing means that we believe makes it more likely that a capability such as what I've described here will be of a positive impact. Here we've got more degree of comfort, and it shows you now the populations with which the specific populations that they would want to share with. And you'll see in the veteran population that with medical researchers, they seem very, very comfortable sharing with at least medical researchers, and also in the darker blue, this blue here for medical healthcare specialists. So there's a high degree of comfort sharing. We know this is an enormously important issue, but at least for the populations we're targeting, there's some comfort there. So now I want to turn to another computer-developed capability, and this gets to what I mentioned before. I just realized that okay, we're good. This speaks to some of the issues I mentioned before about speech. So this provides a graphical display in real time, or it could be used as post-analysis of an interaction between, in this case, two individuals. And what it shows you is, on the left-hand side, that's that you can consider that the subject. So think of, this can be used in a variety of ways, but think of this more like a call center. And this is representing information about the caller, and this is representing information about I'm sorry, I've got that backwards. This is the caller in gray, and in blue here is the counselor. And it gives a pretty significant amount of information in a graphical display about things like tone. So these tone maps are really interesting. Here's the dynamic variation on the y-axis. Here's the speaking rate on the x-axis. And this is something I learned as not somebody from a counseling or a psychology background, that in an interaction that it's very important to have a degree of mirroring. That in fact, if the counselor comes in you've got somebody that's in a somewhat depressed state where they're down here with a slow speaking rate without much dynamic range, and you come in up here at a high rapid speaking rate with a lot of dynamic range, there is no degree of empathy that develops, and consequently there's no effective counseling taking place. So this display quite readily demonstrates where that subject and where that counselor were at any given point in time. And this can move around in real time. And it's has been reported to us by those that use it, that those that are looking to mirror, that this helps very much in real time and after the fact determine the degree to which somebody has developed this ability to do this very important mirroring in the context of interaction and counseling. This display here shows, who had the microphone. Okay, so you can see in this interaction, there's really not a lot of, it's not a free-flowing conversation. We've got the counselor speaking quite a bit, lots of pausing. This would indicate that there's a lot of information I'm sure you could glean by just looking at how frequently the conversation goes back and forth, and also the degree of overlap. So here's the total conversation, and what we found is in a normal, effective dialogue, there's some degree of overlap. But there's a threshold beyond which that it's obvious that there's no communication taking place because they're speaking over each other. But then again, if you have long gaps where there's no overlap at all, also ineffective. So there's in fact a sweet spot that needs to be struck in the terms of effective communication. Also, I'm sure you can see the degree of whether or not there's active listening going on. You can see that reflected in the charts. And I'm not going to speak of each of the individual bars of representation, but hopefully you get a sense that this tool is analyzing the conversation, not the specific words that are being spoken, but in a way that can give feedback to a call center counselor, or somebody that's in training for a call center to be a call center counselor, because we know there's a strict limit to how much training we can give these folks. And we want to maximize that time to help them be as effective as they possibly can be in the context of those duties and responsibilities. Here's more. So here's and in the interest of time, I'm not going to speak to this, but and you can see the slides after. But it shows you, here's an unengaged or depressed patient. You can see that's the patient there. Not a whole lot of movement. There's not great mirroring going on. But here you have a much more engaged pattern. You see you've got some degree of overlap. You can see a pattern that would be much more characteristic of a free-flowing conversation. Okay, so now I'm going to look at Manat. Manat is about the words. Okay, so where on the one hand this was metadata, Manat is about the specific word choice, because we realize more increasingly people communicate in a lot of forms and a lot of settings. And if we had a means to do some analytics on people's communications that is done in an automated fashion, we might again be able to discern those people that are experiencing some degree of emotional distress. So what Manat tried to do is assign a patient's communications, as it's presented to Manat in a variety of forms, into 0, 1, or more codes. Now the codes were their choosing. We actually ran into some problems initially with this program in that we wanted to be very careful not to speak in terms of how we were going to diagnose anybody. This is not a diagnostic tool. And so we had to be very careful when we did things like talk to the DSM-4 and DSM-5 that we're not in effect replacing the human experts that are involved in making those diagnoses, but in fact that we're trying to supplement and complement. So what they did at Manat is they came up with a long list of codes that are potential indicators, and I'll show you some of those for PTSD, depression, and suicidality. And the thrust here is to being able to assist with triage. So we looked at both transcribed audio and written text. At the program when it first kicked off, this was going to be the primary focus. Was, we've got, at that time there was an increasing social media was becoming had come to the fore. We all know that it's very much where it is today, but at that point it became clear that this might be a great target to try to learn about, in this case, veterans as they might express themselves in a variety of forms. So it puts them into these indicators. here's the categories of indicators. So it was about 96. It comes, if that's the number that comes to mind. But they're trying to see indicators of stress, their affect, their behavior, their cognitive state, and their degree of impairment. And this runs as a simple deployable web service. So here is those categories again, and this just shows you a mapping of these are DSM-4 inspired, but they are not they're not trying to replace DSM-4. And what they found is, as they went through the process of kind of give and take, is they realized that they needed to, over time, this is a multi-year program, is they refined these codes over time. They found that there was some overlap and some ambiguity, and as they worked through, they were able to come up with a tighter set of indicators. And frankly, with all the data that they're collecting, it gives them the opportunity to do some machine learning. So here's a screenshot of an interaction, and in the right-hand side here are some of the indicators that are being inferred automatically just based upon the interaction. So, and you could imagine now we've got a clinician that's engaging, in this case, somewhat of a chat interaction with a patient. The patient uses some specific language, that language is recognized, and then it's used in a variety of means to discern some information, some indicators that would be of interest to the clinician. So in some respects, you could read and you say, well, that would be obvious that, you know, a clinician would discern that, but in other cases, that would not necessarily be the case. So it's giving on the right-hand side here having analyzed the text, some indication that one or more of the indicators was in play, and then, of course, you could do some inferencing based upon those indicators. Okay, so that's what Monad is all about. I've done a little harm or damage to making it, oversimplifying it, but in effect, it's looking at text in a variety of forms. If you recall now that we spoke about the mobile application, that information in the audio journaling is captured and can be dumped, and this is how we lash some of these together. It was dumped into Monad, and then you could use that as the basis to not only just get the smiley face sort of indicators as we had before, but you've got the underlying data, and you can make some inference, some substantive inferences, not just based on their behaviors, but also based on their in that case, oral communication. So Sensei is a capability that really tried to push the state-of-the-art, state-of-the-practice in capturing a lot of information about an individual that is undergoing in-person counseling. And it used, as I mentioned, a variety of technologies and capabilities, and it used it in part to discern the degree to which they were experiencing some of these, some distress, but also to do a quite interesting application which they referred to as Ellie. Ellie is an avatar whose purpose is to be an empathetic counselor. And really, really interesting results, none of which I'll present here, but which are captured in the papers. One in particular I'd like to just highlight. It became very obvious that people felt very comfortable opening up to Ellie. And so it was really not the intent. When they put this all together, they had other purposes in mind. But as they tried to tease out, what is the reason behind that? And they felt that Ellie was in that sweet spot where she was not so cartoon-like so as to be not real, but she was not a real person, a real judging person. That, as we all know, there are some patients that are reticent about sharing and really opening up for fear of being judged, even by a counselor. But they knew, I guess, somewhat in the back of their mind that Ellie wasn't real, even though they also knew that as part of the protocol that the whole thing could be seen by a human, but they were able to sort of set that aside. And there was, I'm not going to show you any video, but some are very moving. It's people really getting to some deeply emotional experiences in their life, and being able to open up to Ellie. And when they, they tried to tease out, well, why was it? And it said, well, they felt very comfortable. Now, part of their comfort is because Ellie is quite empathetic. So Ellie is taking advantage of the information that can be gleaned from, body movements. So these just, hand movements convey a lot of information about an individual. The gestures, the facial expressions, and they really did tease out not just the expressions, but the micro expressions. If we all know that the smile is a very ambiguous expression, but that there are subtle cues that sometimes we can read, sometimes we can't, that would help discern whether or not that smile is a smile of joy, a smile of fear, a smile of discomfort. And those things can be hidden from humans, but are very difficult to hide from systems that have been trained to recognize not just the expressions, but the micro expressions, and come up with, discern the true underlying emotional state that caused that expression to be manifest. Voice and response latency, these kind of things counselors use, but now we've got technical means through which to capture data, objective data, and I tie this back to really the talk that preceded mine. We're trying to quantify and measure and capture as much information as we can so that we can make much more well-informed conclusions on the part of what we're trying to do. So there's also, as you can, I've already highlighted some of this, but Ellie and SimSensei is looking at a wide array of information and using that as a means to discern, all of this. Okay, so already mentioned, we're going to use a multimodal analysis that are verbal and nonverbal cues. We did 300 plus interactions with Ellie, 20-minute interviews. They did, by virtue of how, so this is not a rigorously conducted trial, in that they frankly advertised to get a hold of individuals from the veteran population that may have been experiencing PTSD. So with the intent being that being the target, ultimate target application, even though they were overrepresented in the population, that they felt like they would be able to learn more about that specific group. And, at least in terms of the way that it's been characterized, is the potential as a clinician support tool, not as a replacement for clinicians, but that clinicians could use this in the context of having their patients interact with Ellie, and then being able to see the results of the analytics, and at the same time be able to go back and see the entire video transcript of this session if they deem that to be useful. So here is some of the display. I've been told this looks a little scary. It looks a little Hannibal Lecter-ish, if somebody mentioned it one time, and hope that not the intent, but you can see the degree to which data is collected that can be used to discern things like not just expression, but micro-expression. And it uses, and be able to discern things like eye gaze and point of focus, and use all of that data as a means, and we're doing some voice analytics here. You can see they're collecting lots of data, using that as a means in this context to help Ellie be more empathetic, but also creating a data set against which analytics can be done. And this is interesting. We have a build here, but it wasn't intentional. Okay, so all this is trying to do, don't worry about the specific words. You could see that there's characteristic differences between these two populations. As we compare those that were under distress versus those that weren't in distress, that you've got some characteristic differences, and then hopefully in the aggregate you can see how you can begin to use this data as a means to discern their cognitive emotional states. And so in terms of accuracy, this is just, again, please by all means note that the specific results are better and more detail reflected in the papers that speak to this work. But the accuracy of the depression ratings without indicators and with indicators, you see some interesting higher degrees of accuracy using the capability as been described. So I end on this slide. This is one of just a partial listing of some of the recently published papers. There's more, and as it turns out, Kevin and I were talking in the car over, we anticipate there's going to be probably as much or more subsequent work. That's a very common phenomenon with DARPA projects to have some publications while it's ongoing, but then when they have the luxury of time after the work has been completed, they will often then produce some research publications. And if there's any questions, I imagine we have some time?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Question for Dr. Ragsdale.
Yeah, Kathleen Decker, psychiatrist, Hampton VA Medical Center, Eastern Virginia Medical School. So my question, which I imagine a few other people in the audience share, is of these three products that you've presented, what is the ability of us to use them in future research studies? Are these commercially available? Or do you have to pay for them? What's the status?
Okay, so it's a great question. I will say the entirety of the work I presented was done using government resources. So we have government purpose rights on all of the capability. As many of you know, frequently what occurs in a situation like this is they'll do work to get it to a certain point, and each of these are at a relatively high technical readiness level. But then as the work is completed, as they throw additional work on top of it, then that could introduce a circumstance where there would be some licensing required. Having said that, we've got at least 2 memorandums of understanding where this capability has been made available to two specific organizations at no cost. One, I'll give you an example. The initial, the Cogito products, the companion and the clinician, or the clinician in particular, that has now been developed into a commercial product that they've added some additional resources to. It's being used in call centers, and not just hotlines, but actually call centers where you could imagine when they're calling you during dinner, they would like to know your cognitive emotional state on the other end of the line, and they want to know how well their folks are doing. So that one in particular is a relatively low-cost commercial product, but can be used in a variety of applications. So while it varies across our portfolio as described, by all means, don't hesitate. If you're interested in doing some follow-on, contact us, and we can work together to make that happen.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
And that's great work, by the way.
I have to give credit to Russ Schilling. I just had the great honor and privilege to inherit some really interesting program.
So my name is Liz Brennan. I'm a psychiatrist at Fort Belvoir Community Hospital in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. I was wondering if you could talk about security, because as interesting as this is clinically, in the wrong hands, this is a psychological operations targeting system. I mean, how do you, this is sort of everybody's worst nightmare about artificial intelligence. I joke that Amazon Prime knew what I wanted for Valentine's Day better than anybody else.
Yes.
And this is sort of this is something that consenting people can participate in, not realizing the scope of it.
Yes.
And it wouldn't take, in the wrong hands, much to have unconsenting people.
Yes.
And you're targeting a very vulnerable population. So how are you addressing that?
Okay, so this is a really, really excellent question, and I feel like we got at least a decent answer. On the one hand, my background is cybersecurity. This is the area that I've devoted most of my professional life to. And I haven't spoken any sort of detail about that here. So the focus of my personal focus, but also the focus of the office that I come from, is on cybersecurity. But I will say that was not a focus of this works and needs to be. So I'm acknowledging that. I want to also point this out. Privacy is such a central topic for all of us. And DARPA, by virtue of the kind of work that we do, believes, and they've made this very clear, believes that there is some technical aspects of privacy that need to be addressed in the here and now. That if we don't get after this, it might, quote, become too late. That a very well-respected colleague of mine says that privacy is dead. We should have no expectation of privacy and just move on. There are those, myself included, and many at DARPA that believe that's not true. So there's a new program the broad air announcement. Do we know if this is out on the street yet, Kevin? John Latchberry's. Okay. So recently approved, soon to be a broad air announcement, is a large-scale DARPA program that targets the development of technical means that specifically address the challenges of privacy. And those technical means would be developed to be used in conjunction with capabilities such as what I've described here and others to see if there are some theoretically sound models through which we could ensure security and privacy of data, particularly in contexts like this. So while not a focus of this program, it is an important area of focus for DARPA, and I would encourage you to keep your ear to the rail on that specific program to see how it might contribute for medical data, for financial data, for any sort of data that we would like to keep private.
Question?
She was here.
Okay.
Thanks. Colonel Ragsdale, Tracy Comus from the Marine Corps, big fan of yours. So.
Thank you.
The West Point moms say hello.
Okay.
I was tweeting you while you were talking. But in terms of like our Marine Corps engagement with DARPA, it's sometimes we're talking about blast gauges, which vaguely relate to health. Sometimes we're talking about bionic arms. You were up here talking about programs that I've seen through the MOMROP programs, through AMAD and at Fort Detrick. I sit on the IPRs. Within DARPA, how does your program of research that is related to health and well-being fall in the structure? I mean, I don't understand how you've been doing this work at DARPA and it's not floated across my desk in the last few years.
Okay, so these are really great questions. So we're in a period of evolution in this space that they have and somehow seized victory from the jaws of defeat. And I'll explain it in this way. So my office is the Information Innovation Office. It's one of 6 technical offices. And the problem with having, or the luxury of having information in your name is that means you could do anything, right? We literally, there's not a topic out there that we couldn't somehow wedge under this umbrella of innovation. But my boss is an incredibly talented technical manager. He realized to lead is to choose. So he has chosen that the direction of the office, now this is important for what it doesn't include, is cybersecurity, big data, and ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. You didn't hear me say anything that sounded like it was related to this. Russ Schilling, who I've alluded to a number of times, was in our office, and frankly, he was, over here, and the rest of us are over here. So as Russ was leaving, and he's passing the program to me, I was lamenting, well, who is going to carry this on? Because it's really important work. I mean, my time at DARPA actually is short now. So it turns out the seizing victory from the jaws of defeat, in the last year, the Biology Technology Office has been created. And the Biology Technology Office is where the work will continue. Now, not specific, there's no specific follow-on as there is in some DARPA programs, but they're doing the Brain Initiative, they're doing work where education and training in the Biology Technology Office. So I would encourage you to be cognizant of the program managers at DARPA in the biology technology office, because they will come in with a research interest, and more often than not, that's what programs result from that. So that's where the work will be done. So I'm quite heartened and encouraged that even though Russ Schilling has left and I'm going to be departing, and there will be nobody left in my office that frankly is focused on this type of topic or this specific topic area, the folks over in the biology technology office are. And those are the folks that I would encourage you to stay connected with, maybe develop a relationship with the program managers in that office that have an interest in this space.
One last question.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Scott Gordon. I'm with the 296 Project in Crystal City. Well, first thing I want to say is my 4-year-old daughter's name is Ellie, so in watching your presentation, I envision my adorable daughter treating somebody, which is perhaps effective. Well, first of all, the DCAPS project is really fascinating, and I know that you're overseeing other just fascinating work like that done by the team at Connection.
Sure.
And Heather Wires. I guess it's a question. I'm hoping you can just speak to something. I have concerns. You mentioned that Ellie and DCAPS is supposed to be a support tool. But considering, for example, that the avatar, so to speak, doesn't require bathroom breaks, doesn't pull a salary, doesn't need health care, and doesn't need to meet other sort of OSHA requirements.
Yes.
I'm concerned that DoD and DARPA has the potential to implement something like this service-wide, especially in combat zones where now we are really, we're paying attention to how to keep people safe. But a service-wide implementation, in my opinion, tends to be a move backwards in treating polytrauma. We're completely removing the human element. And I guess my question is, what's going to keep DARPA or DoD from making an implementation like this and putting the human beings who understand the context, out of business?
Yeah. So it's a series of great questions. It's a great question. One sort of throwaway response would be, DARPA's purpose is to push forward the boundaries of knowledge and to look at capability in some respects that we're concerned that our adversaries may be developing, so we need to be in that space so that we could discern where they might be. But in this instance, not so much focused on an adversary, but looking at ways to get better. And the motivation behind this was to help human counselors to enhance their capability, not to replace them, even though that is, as you highlight, certainly a possibility. But while DARPA does not wash its hands of it, DARPA doesn't implement anything. DARPA develops capability that could be adopted by others, but doesn't do so in an ethical or moral vacuum, or in a vacuum of not considering that. And I think it's probably obvious how I presented this. This is not about replacing those critical human experts in this process, but they are a limited and scarce resource. And the idea that motivated this was, let's help them get better. Let's give them tools that would enhance their ability to provide effective care. And your point is well taken and has to be, as probably obvious, I kind of led with that anybody that's in this space needs to know that we do greater harm or damage if we think we can eliminate those important human experts that are drawing upon lifelong devotion to these topics and replacing them. The goal is to try to reinforce, to complement, to enhance as opposed to replace. But that possibility is always there, and I think folks like yourself and others will say, well, let's be very cautious as we move forward. These we live in interesting times. Let's not make the situation worse rather than better.